I am Flavio Diaz-Miron. I am leading the Mexican chapter of INVAO, and we are currently organizing the first Mexican summer school of traditional architecture and urbanism in Yucatan. And also I coordinate the Dutch summer school in Utrecht, the Netherlands. This talk is going to be about youth and academia, and I would like to say a few words that give the general idea of what this talk is about. So it goes like this. Youth in architecture is a determining factor for architectural change. New generations are quite commonly prone to adopt new and radical ideas, to put them into practice, often in opposition to the status quo. It has been said that generational changes may be influenced by outside conditions, such as economy, societal rules, geopolitics, etc. Given the current situation that most students and young architects face, it could be possible to know the future of architecture by understanding their preferences, motivations, and concerns. If we compare our present with the times of the past, we can certainly feel that the past was more eventful. However, I would like to remind our audience that we 21st century humans have seen events that have marked our lives significantly. Perhaps the most obvious event of the past few years was the COVID-19 pandemic, which greatly opened our eyes to how the built environment impacts our health. There are new world players contesting global control, as China, obviously, and India. Asia being a huge player on providing global construction materials to the world economy. And we haven't been free of war. The most important war conflict of our time may be the invasion of Russia into eastern Ukraine, and of course, sadly, the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. But let us not forget that there is still war in places in Africa or Yemen. Therefore, I was handled the task of moderating a representative cohort of young architects from different countries, and I hope that they could help us foresee the future of traditional architecture or architecture more in general. So I would like to hand over the mic, so to speak, to Ms. Ishtar Mondragon.
Hi, thank you, Flavio. So I'm fairly new to traditional architecture, but I quickly came to realize all the advantages it brings in solving complex issues in a project, and that's what I wish to talk about. Should I share my screen? Okay, so I decided to title my presentation Building for Growth and Degrowth in Mexican Town. I think we are all familiar with the concept of growth, the increase in population, economic activities, and physical expansion of urban areas over time. But our generation will also face the challenge of degrowth, meaning the reduction in economic activity, use, and even value of town, which is particularly difficult to face if you are in a construction industry. So the first example where I came to see the use of traditional principles for building was in a growing town. It's called Zacatlan. It's here in Mexico, and it is a booming tourist destination, mainly because of its historic quarter, which is very well preserved. Here are some pictures to give you an idea of the character of the town. It was first urbanized during the 16th century, following Hispanic building traditions. So it's a grid, and the blocks were allotted to single families, which would have small homesteads. So not only their houses, but small orchards and places to keep livestock and the such. During the 19th century, the town's population increased, and these blocks started becoming divided within the family members, and buildings were erected, and so it gained a much more urban character. However, okay, no, not yet. So here we see one of these typical urban homesteads. This is very well preserved. You can see at the front, the house and the typical construction of the area, which is adobe blocks, a wooden structure for the roof, and then tiles. So currently, a lot of the area that was reserved for yards and orchards and the like gets sold off by the families to use this land differently. During the 20th century, this would happen with modern construction methods, as we see on the top right image, that didn't really relate to the previous design and character. After 2005, we started having a lot of more restrictions around what you could do in this type of town, which in theory would preserve the original buildings. I think in practice, it has fragmented the town even further. Here we see the original wall that enclosed the garden, but it is completely ignored and neglected because the buildings have to stand separate from it. And so there is no use anymore for what was part of the town. We start seeing a lot of fragmentation of what was once like a really compact town. When I was working in the urban development department of Zacatlán, we were called to act on this alley that was perceived like a very dangerous place by the locals. Of course, they started avoiding it, and so it became more and more dangerous with time. And one of the complaints was, oh, it's so narrow, but we couldn't exactly tear down everything. And when we came to study the area, we realized it was not so much a problem of dimensions, but a problem of use. This wall, the white wall, used to be enclosing a yard, and due to its age, it is now protected, and it cannot be intervened, creating this completely like blind barrier that of course becomes dangerous at night. Here on the picture on the left, you can see this is the original block. To the top is the original 16th century house. Then towards the bottom are the 19th century additions, and the whole right side is what was the yard and became a parking lot and a nightclub, now abandoned, because they couldn't interact, they couldn't intervene at all on this wall. Here it is at the top, and as we started measuring it, I really began to understand that we were dealing with a whole different type of architecture. I could see that there were some repeating measures on this wall, but they didn't make a lot of sense until I realized it was built with adobe blocks, and through them I could start to understand why things had the size that they did. This is the intervention we proposed, again, examining which particular blocks we would have to remove, as this is a monumental site due to its age. And we were very afraid of creating like a historical forgery, so we tried to avoid details or ornamentation, but just create a permeable wall so that they could build inside a restaurant, a shop, or any other use other than a parking lot that would encourage the crime to keep rising. This was my first project in which I started considering traditional architecture, and although it is pending a lot of permits, it was a turning point for me. The second example was after I left my position as an urban developer and came to work as a private developer in Poza Rica, Mexico. This is a completely opposite example. This is a completely new town. It was founded during the 30s. All of the architecture is new, following these very rationalist principles. You can judge if you like them or not, but it has created a very difficult town. And worst of all, its reason for being founded was the extraction of petroleum, which has since run out. And this is a rapidly degrowing town. It's becoming vacant. This picture on the left is a favorite of mine because you can see, yes, some houses in a vernacular style at the foreground, but in the background, most of the buildings in the area, which are industrial, and of course, all of them connected by really big, high-speed streets. To the right is a current view, which is completely messy, very dystopic. There is no character, urban spaces, as you can see, in the bottom right are very, very ugly. And as buildings become vacant, it just feels like a very unsafe and unlovable place that everybody wants to live. So some of the first buildings that are abandoned are large buildings because these are very hard to upkeep, and most people don't want to be like the last tenant living in an empty building that is falling apart around them. When it comes to offices and supermarkets, they prefer building a new building, even if it's further away, than refurbishing one of these old ones, which leaves us with a town that is not only shrinking in population, but also shrinking in density very fast. So I was quite dismayed when these developers were tasked with creating an office building that had to have a certain size, pretty large, for renting. This meant that it would be used for the next 20 years, and after that it would have an uncertain future. To the top right, you can see the original design, which I thought was quite ugly and very uninviting. Through talking with my colleagues, I started asking them, well, what if we could create value in this building so that after its 20 years of use, it can be used for something else other than, a government office. And although I could not change the layout or the structure, we started working on the facade and creating a more palatable image that would relate a bit more to the street. These are a few of the iterations. This building is currently being designed. Just today it had some changes, but the changes were very simple to go from, something that looks cheap, ugly, and uninviting to something that has a little bit of our character that at least intends to show that we are in Mexico, we are in a town, and this is a building that you would like to stay in. So hopefully, just as I saw buildings in Zacatlan that were used for hundreds and hundreds of years, hopefully we can create something that people will want to inhabit after the contract is over. So in conclusion, I think traditional architecture is an amazing tool for responding to a growing or even a degrowing town, just as long as we remember that we have to create beauty in order for people to inhabit our spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Ishtar. That was amazing. Our next panelist is from Russia, Soliak Kotiev. Soliak.
Hello, do you see me? Or
You don't
hello? It's strange a bit. Maybe my camera doesn't work. I apologize. But in any case, I will screen share now. So today,
Sorry for asking it to all the speakers, but since we have our schedule and we want everybody to have a little time to present their work, it would be very, very great if you could condense everything down, not just you, Soya, but the other ones to like 5 minutes, if that would be possible.
yes, I will talk really briefly.
We want to give everybody a platform. Thank you so much for that.
Okay.
We'll
I
give
will
you a
just,
2-minute warning.
Okay, I'm now a PhD student. I study the language of the Italian mannerism in the architecture, and that's what I try to use in my works, as I every time love decadence and some unusual way to use the architectural order. Here are some of my works, which I posted to Instagram, but I wanted to talk about this picture you have everybody seen on the Tech for coverage, which we did together with Dr. Buras, and that was the way how I used the knowledge get into my late Renaissance research in the practical way. First of all, it's the free use of order, the use of grottos, and rustification. And I think not everybody of you have seen the other parts of this building we designed together with Dr. Buras. That was one of our earliest variants. Unfortunately, the client in the end chose some other option without the classical order in some more Gothic style, but how it looks now. I used some motifs from Giulio Romano's Palazzo del Tè. For example, this rhythm of or this two rhythm of arch, the big one and the smaller one, like so. And of course, there is some disproportion, but done especially for that occasion. I think that's it.
That's great. I think we have a question for you, Mr. Cotier.
Okay.
Which is,
Yes.
what programs do you use for your rendering and drafting?
That depends about which picture are you talking now. This This picture, the first one, was done in Rhino, and then just photoshopped, and the render also was done in Rhino. Of course, I used Illustrator and some other graphical redact, but this is SketchUp. I think you see it because this variant was declined by client. There was no sense to do the final render of it, so I just used the SketchUp filter.
Okay, thank you very much, Olyak. I wish we heard more of that, perhaps in another
No.
time.
Yes, but you asked me to talk briefly, so
That's true. That's
try
true.
to do my best.
That's true. Thanks. Next, we have Mr. Cole Wagner. Cole.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're well. I hear there is some time, so I will try to get this done in a New York minute. I work as a research specialist in Robert A.M. Stern Architects, where I support the work of the firm through background and precedent research, developing and supporting lectures and events on diverse architectural topics, and help administer the RAMSA Fellowship, a $15,000 travel award given to graduate students in their penultimate year of study to explore the theme of tradition and invention in architecture. Previously, I worked for Douglas Elliman Real Estate, one of the top 3 real estate brokerages in New York City, as a site administrator supporting brokers and their teams at high-profile luxury residential developments throughout Manhattan and Brooklyn. During and after my undergraduate studies, I worked as a research assistant for Professor Barry Bergdahl, professor of architectural history at Columbia University and former chief curator of design at the Museum of Modern Art. I hold degrees in architectural history and theory, construction enterprise and project management, and I'm a proud graduate of the inaugural class of INTBouw Let's Build a Beautiful City Summer School in Utrecht, the Netherlands. Now let me share my screen. Here we go.
You can see
My
it.
architectural history education has been mostly focused on French Gothic architecture of the Ile-de-France and 19th and 20th century American architects, with a particular emphasis on the ornamental decorations from these time periods in the Revolution. Over the course of my education, what has become strikingly clear to me is that architectural ornament is more than just a decoration, a component, or even a key part of a wider picture, although it does fit into all those categories. What ornament ultimately is a communicative language in and of itself, by which and through which the intentions of both the individual architect, artisan, as well as a wider culture are expressed down through time through others to read, interpret, and re-express. Through adapting a system of representational ornament, architecture takes on what Jonathan Massey notes as a mode of elaboration that has a socializing function. By working within and being informed by the local urban heritage and expressing this through ornamental design, architects can use visual elements to add to new buildings that communicate the character of the client, the architect, and the zeitgeist of the age itself. My studies of ornament began with my late undergraduate research on scalar relationships in Gothic microarchitecture. The style of Gothic began with Notre Dame de Senlis and the Basilique de Saint-Denis in the very last quarter of the 12th century and evolved over time, expressed by Notre Dame de Paris, Soissons, and Reims. In the course of those evolutions, the architecture moved away from Romanesque style heavy barrel vaulting expressed in thick piers, which were gradually but firmly retired in favor of ever higher vaulting in order to create thin, light spaces supported by flying buttresses. These spatial arrangements of independent supporting and highly decorated buttresses supporting the piers surrounding a choir space were here established as a singularly Gothic visual effect. We see the same visual effect in microarchitecture created by Gothic ornamental decoration. Artisans of 13th century France created miniature cathedrals by deploying both the ornamental forms called pinnacles, crockets, and florins on various objects with a wide variety of both sizes and liturgical functions. This usage of ornament was pervasive to the point that it is difficult to determine what the actual liturgical function of these objects was in certain cases. Through this ideal of Gothic became understood through ornament and was reflected back up into the macro scale from these smaller objects through ornamental sculpture work on the larger buildings, which acted as a bridge between the microarchitectural and macroarchitectural realms of the smaller objects. These scalar transformations in ornamental decoration came to be a key component of what defines a Gothic building, especially in later structures. I followed these studies with a look at a building closer to my home, the RCA Victor GE Tower. This skyscraper is an imposing and grand early skyscraper dominated by an ornamental program that aggressively highlights the energetic spirit of both its age and the companies that built it. However, there is also an association with the old world in the forms of the Gothic framework for the Art Deco style to express itself within. This clerestory crown is where the dual influences in Gothic and Art Deco come together most strongly. The merging of both the vertical in the form of the swooping arch and linear fluting elements, along with the creation of the thicket of pinnacles at the top, amply evoked the heights of French Gothic building. At the same time, the physical ornaments themselves dispense with the lightness and metallic character of rayonnant ornamental decoration in favor of a blocky and angular geometry. Despite this change in style, however, the ornament clearly displays both the architectural knowledge to understand a Gothic organizational program and the skill to apply an Art Deco ornamental scheme to it, while including a uniquely American iconography of abstract Native American faces and lightning bolts that physically represent the commissioning firm's business of radio and electricity. What I learned through studying the architects of this tower, the brothers John and Elliot Cross, mostly from the excellent monograph written by Peter Penoyer and Ann Walker and with a foreword by my employer, is that the Beaux-Arts architectural education they received enabled them to create many different architecturally diverse buildings based on their clients' needs. John Cross, the brother behind the designs of Cross & Cross, Elliot administered the business affairs of the firm, attended the atelier of Victor Laloux after a short stint at Columbia in the late 1890s, where he learned drafting, drawing, the principles of proportion, and the relationships of parts, graduating from the École in 1906. The education John received let the buildings designed by the partnership be a part of many different styles, such as the unique combination of Gothic and Art Deco that is the RCA Victor building, to various vernaculars, such as the Georgian style, colonial revival, and participating in the streamlined classicism of 1930s New York. This adaptability reflects the great skill as architects, but it also reflects the opportunities for creativity made possible through the skills taught by a Beaux-Arts education. This adaptability was not unique to John Cross. There are many more architects who could be referenced as examples. In the interests of time, however, I would like to highlight my final subject, the American architect Louis Sullivan and his 1924 publication, System of an Ornament. Sullivan, as I'm sure most of you are aware, is best known for inventing the steel frame skyscraper and writing the essay that coined the phrase, "Form shall ever follow function." These achievements on their face do not lend themselves to popularity in the circles that we move in right now. However, Sullivan's built work and philosophy belie this popular interpretation. His education, despite his own stated indifference to its effects, reflects an appreciation for and a commitment to the principles of Beaux-Arts classical education, particularly through his ornamental work. He began his studies at MIT during the years of 1872 into 1873, after which he requested the advice of Richard Morris Hunt, the first American architect to train in Paris, for advice on attending the École. A partner of Hunt's advised him to spend some time in Philadelphia working for Frank Furness, who was in Hunt's École Atelier, which was followed by a stint in the office of William Le Barangini, the only French architect trained in Chicago. French-trained architect in Chicago, excuse me. Finally, in 1874, Sullivan went to Paris, studying in the atelier of Émilie Vadremer. There, it is possible that he encountered Victor-Marie Ruprecht-Robert, professor of the history and composition of ornament and author of the folio Flore Ornementale, a book of methods for the decorative abstraction of plant types and their elaboration into painted or carved ornamentation. The architectural historian and Sullivan scholar David Van Zanten considers it highly likely that Sullivan directly engaged with Ruprecht-Robert during his time in Paris, both through circumstantial evidence and through examination of Sullivan's subsequent work. What Zanten consistently expresses is that both in ornament and architecture, Sullivan, while taking very clear choices to chart out his own architectural and decorative courses to incredible effect, both specifically sought out as his education and expressly utilized the principles of spatial organization and development he learned from the École des Beaux-Arts. I have named my lecture Towards a New Ornament as a bit of a cheeky riposte to the mistranslated English title of Le Corbusier's seminal polemic, Towards a New Architecture. This is because I believe the people at this conference right now are uniquely positioned to learn these languages to interpret, design, and create in architecture and decoration by using the classic principles originally espoused by the teachings of the École des Beaux-Arts. This is not to say that styles, ornaments, and architectures will not inevitably change based on the needs and desires of clients and the zeitgeist of the age, as we saw with the evolution of Gothic and the examples of the Cross brothers and Sullivan. Indeed, classicism itself underwent its own evolutionary expression through mannerism, Baroque, Rococo, and many other forms. However, understanding the principles and skills of classical architecture, which the École des Beaux-Arts enabled Sullivan, Cross and Cross, and many others to do, provides a base of knowledge and a capability that will enable the many talented individuals beginning here and who will join us in the future to take the next steps forward based on whatever needs or inspirations that the built environment of the future will respond to. The noted New York Times architecture critic Ada Louise Huxtable wrote in her postscript to the second edition of A System of Ornament that Sullivan stood between an old age and a new one and attempted to show us methods to integrate both the need for height through and
sorry.
All right, it's now our turn to follow his example and move towards our new ornament. Thank you very much.
Hello, Cole. Thank you very much for that presentation. That was fascinating. I would like to ask you more of that later. Next, we have, I believe, Miss Madeleine Giannini, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I believe so. Do I go ahead and share my screen, or is it going to be uploaded? I can do either
You can
one.
share your screen, shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, so much.
And we have I made a little mistake. We have not too many so many speakers as I thought. So you have 5 to 10 minutes or something, just to let you know.
Thank you. Well, my name is Madeleine Giannini. I have been studying classical architecture for the past 4 years at Benedictine College, and I'm going to continue my education and get my master's at Notre Dame, where I hope to kind of continue discussing these ideas. But one thing that I wanted to talk about today is a question that I've been asking myself as I study these traditions of our past and become incredibly interested in the local vernacular traditions as well, juxtaposed with the architecture that I see rising up around me. So I chose to give this talk on the importance of preserving our local identities and local crafts. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So I'm particularly interested in this question because I believe that it engages a question of what moves us to build in general. And I do believe that it is a pressing issue that becomes more pressing as we become more of a global society, as our technologies become more universally adopted, and the need to rely on our local building traditions becomes I guess, less necessarily relevant, and we become more estranged from our traditions and our values. I'd like to reference a convention held by UNESCO in 2003 about safeguarding what they call our intangible cultural heritage. And they label our intentional cultural heritage as the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, skills, instruments, objects, artifacts and cultural spaces. They say that this is passed down generation to generation and is a kind of inherent representation of who we are, that's not imposed upon us, but something that naturally evolves out of our daily life. They also, in this conference, really highlighted that this is at risk of being lost as we kind of move into the future, and that it's going to take an intentional effort to preserve. So this was in 2003 when they had this convention, but I would like to show some examples of architecture, most of which has been built after that point. These are 3 buildings that stand in 3 separate countries. We have the...
Sorry, Madeleine, we cannot see your slides.
I can see your slides. You're still on the materials and craft slide, right? Or
no, I'm not. Okay, I'm sorry about that.
Unshare and share again.
Let me try this again. Perfect. I won't click slideshow. So these are 3 separate buildings in 3 different countries. You have what's kind of commonly known as the Monroe Towers in Canada, the Ordos Museum in China, and then the UNIC residence in Paris, France. They all look stylistically kind of indistinguishable, and you can't really infer anything about the culture that they're from just based on their style. Again, these are 3 examples of 3 separate buildings in 3 different countries that stylistically it's difficult to distinguish between them, and they're not inherently related to the cultures that are in them or the people that reside in them. In contrast, these are some works of architecture that represent the people that inhabit their spaces as well as the climates that they're built in. In Morocco, you have ornament that's reflective of the religious beliefs of that culture. Amsterdam, the way that these cities are built reflect their patterns of development, the Pantheon, of course. And then in Santa Fe, in the United States, you see a craft building style that is reflective of that unique climate and the local craft in that area. And then in Thailand, again, reflective of their core beliefs and also the unique climate that these structures evolved out of. So crucial to these intangible aspects of our culture, we have the materials craft of a culture. You see a thatch roof, and any master thatcher will tell you that this practice works best when you source your materials locally. In Thailand, everything about this architecture is informed by their environment and their local beliefs, the overhangs of their roofs. It's all specifically related to the nuances of that environment and that culture. The American Institute of Building Design, they've outlined how essential building in this way is to our the health of our society, in many ways, to our economy, to our environmental health, and to our sustainability. Also in this is the narrative, as Cole's last presentation discussed. It's so essential that our ornament is reflective of this narrative. And in the classical or traditional sense, this typically was the job of the ornament to really express our narrative relationship to our buildings. And these things, they kind of contribute to what creates our distinct architectural substyles. I'd like to go back to those previous pictures that I showed. And although you can't infer much about the people who occupy these buildings from their styles, they are distinct images of the architect that's designed them. All of these are the product of MAD architects out of Beijing, and you can pick out their work among others. Again, these structures, they're the work of Zaha Hadid, and you see that same phenomenon. So from this, I begin to ask the question, is it almost more rational to describe our sub-styles of architecture based on the individual egos that produce our work rather than the people who actually occupy our buildings? And it makes me ask the question, what moves us to design, and what is the role of genius in our architecture of an individual and an individual mind? You could see in our contemporary era, maybe the answer to this question is to think of something that's incredibly novel, that's never seen. But I do believe that it's something more, whereas maybe we see it now as important to be revolutionary or ubiquitous. I kind of go back to maybe more of an understanding that genius is an ability to understand. And Albert Einstein, his famous quote is that genius is kind of taking complex things and making them simple. In other words, synthesizing information, synthesizing complexity, but it is in reference to something that you come out of. So I have a quote here from Group 07 that I'd like to reference in their manifesto. Since ornament is no longer organically related to our culture, it's no longer the expression of our culture. The ornament that is created today has no connection with us, has no human connections at all, and no connection to the world order. This is an interesting counter argument to a lot of our traditions to say that we are no longer related to them. But I believe that it doesn't, I guess, recognize that we are inherently related to our traditions, whether we like it or not. And even to be modern is to be related to what we evolve out of. And the role of a genius may be to kind of synthesize the role of our past and what we desire in our future, and how we move forward in a way that's not overly sentimental about our past. A danger that I, as a student, am kind of becoming aware of is maybe the temptation to sentimentally apply our traditions in a way that's not related to us. But I don't believe that's the only way. But I do believe that we are asked to really understand our traditions in order to preserve the identities that we've inherited. So this is a quote, Arthur Erickson, a modernist architect, but said something that I kind of really agree with here. To ennoble the place, the people who use it. It is a gift that as architects to be able to do that great buildings that move the spirit have always been rare. In every case, they are unique, poetic products of the heart. So I, as a student, am becoming aware of this pressing responsibility to really see architecture as a service to represent the people who inhabit our buildings rather than to display the ego of an individual for empty novelty.
Thank you. Flavio, are you there? Yes.
Yes, thank you, Marilyn. That was fantastic. We hope you all the best in Notre Dame. And next we have also from our own summer school in the Netherlands, Mr. Brandon Bozas.
Great, thanks for having me. I'm Brandon Bozas, and it's great to see so many familiar faces as well as unfamiliar faces. And I'll share my screen. Can you see this?
Yes, we can.
All right, great, thank you. So I took this talk a little more literally than maybe some other people did. And so I'm currently 17. I attended the INBAU summer school at the ripe old age of 16. And so I don't have much work to show. However, I can show some of the pathways that I took in going to this school in it, and then what I thought of it and where to go from here. And so just a little bit of background on me. I grew up and currently still live in Urbana, Maryland, which is a bit of a satellite suburb on the commuter fringe of Washington, D.C. And so sometimes I joke, I call it the last great garden city of the 20th century, which is kind of a joke because it was a planned urban development that was established in 1999, right, the last year of the 20th century. And it's more of a joke because while it is planned, it still exhibits many of the deficiencies that characterize most of American automobile suburbia, the lack of walkability, the monoculture, no mix of uses, no real life on the street. And so it kind of flies in the face of Ebenezer Howard's original notion of garden cities. However, just a little bit about a 30-minute drive in any direction from where I live, there are beautiful 18th, 19th century examples of urbanism, places like Baltimore, Frederick, Maryland, Washington, D.C. And so for most of my most formative years, there's been this juxtaposition, this dichotomy between where I live and then the places I inhabit. And so this has always been in the back of my head, but by the time I was perhaps a few years ago, these thoughts started crystallizing. I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with James Kunstler's diatribe on American suburbia. And so for the first time, I started to intellectually think about why does the neighborhoods that I live in look so much different than the ones that generations before me had built? And so that also plays into the books that I started reading. And by the time COVID-19 hit, I was a freshman in high school with probably a little bit too much free time on my hands. And so I discovered things such as Tag 2122. I traveled the world via Google Earth, and I read more seminal books on the topic, such as The New Civic Art, American Vitruvius, and The American Vignola. And hopefully soon I'll get to read The Normal Vitruvius and Vignola, but maybe I was just a little too patriotic back then. And so eventually I discovered the Let's Build a Beautiful City summer school in 2022, and I submitted my application. And to my surprise, I actually got in. And so to talk a little bit about the experience, one of the things that I think is most underrated about these summer schools, or just travel in general, is the ability to learn about precedent. And even though I traveled all around the United States, I realized that I had never actually seen a square before in any real substance. And it's one of those deals where you don't know what you're missing until you actually experience it. And I think that's something that I kept on seeing over and over again. Additionally, besides just looking at Google Earth and seeing urbanism from that perspective, perhaps more important than the actual physical manifestation of buildings and urbanism is the kind of lifestyle that they create. Things that they allow you to do, whether that's, especially in the Netherlands, biking places, but then also being able to, after class, go out to a cafe, biking to class, stopping by the grocery store. That's something that a lot of people simply never experience. And if they can't experience it, then how do they know what they're missing out on? And then, of course, there was the curriculum. And I would say one of the greatest strengths of the curriculum was the fact that even though it was geared towards traditional architecture and urbanism, there wasn't a distinct agenda. On the other hand, it was more just a group of people that were very knowledgeable on certain aspects of the topic, and they were very passionate about it. And so we shared that between the students that were there and also people. And so as somebody who has a very nascent career in the field, it was very enlightening to be able to see all these different pathways without being pigeonholed into some hopeless corner of architecture, which is something I try to stay away from. And then, of course, finally, there were the students, many of whom are here today. And for me, but I think also for a lot of other people, it was the first time meeting other people that were passionate about the same exact things that we were. Even though I was the youngest, I was hardly atypical. And so between the students and the tutors, it was a sort of community where we could learn about different strategies and different ideas that we weren't exposed to before, including, of course, our techniques for rendering and design thinking and all that. And so by the end, I took away quite a bit, and 2.5 weeks goes by quite fast, but that wasn't the end. And the N in INTBOW stands for network, and I think that is very true because I've been granted a lot of great opportunities as a result. for example, just a few months after, I believe it was Ruben in the group chat, which sent out this architecture competition in Australia. And so I submitted my designs. And I think in this zoomed in area, you could see a lot of similar aspects that I applied of the concepts I learned in the school now in their physical manifestation. Things like hierarchy of spaces, engaging facades, even just vertical alignment of voids and solids is all present in the work. Other projects, I never stopped continuing my education, even if it was like a toddler learning how to speak English, just copying what they see. This is an analytique I did for my AP Calculus class. Don't ask how that happened, but just again, trying to understand ornament. I don't think there's many easier, or there aren't many better ways to learn about the design of something than by hand drawing. And then of course, also to things like architecture. This is a national architecture competition. Again, reconciling the traditions of the past with trying to solve real world problems. This was a theoretical design for a renovation and addition of an elementary and middle school in Baltimore, Maryland. And so I employed in this case a degree of strict classicism, but keeping some of the original proportions and creating a place that would be most accommodating and most facilitating to a great childhood in inner city Baltimore. And then of course, eventually you have enough built up work behind you that I ended up in a firm, a local architecture and planning firm in Frederick, near where I live, that specializes in new urbanist town design. And so while it's important to note that I didn't make the site plan, 1 minute?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll speed up. It was, again, you can see a lot of the same aspects that I put into the renderings of these designs. And so just for the sake of time, I'll skip that. Because another thing was conceptually the notion of organic town designs. I think not only was it the physical raw skills of learning architectural design that we learned from these courses, but also the concepts that still kind of bug me to this day. For example, the notion of one of the lectures was on organic town development and how juxtaposing the new traditional towns with the old organically grown places like the center city of Utrecht. But of course, that isn't just there. Everywhere we look, there seems to be these coarse grain developments versus the fine grain lot by lot developments that I think make most of the great urban environments that we love. And so this is what's been on my mind recently, and I think it's still an outcropping of the lectures that I got at the summer school, was how do we return to that finer grained method of town development in places like Philadelphia. They grew lot by lot, even if William Penn had a plan. By the time that it actually grew, it looked nothing like William Penn had originally envisioned. It grew on the side of the river, much like how, in a way that would better work for their economy. And of course, this can be extended to the commissioner's plan of 1811 in New York City, again, incremental growth. And even Washington, D.C., which we mostly think of for their planning, if L'Enfant were to go to D.C. today, he wouldn't be able to recognize it because he only drew the streets and the urban regulations for rights of ways and public realm. And so even though he didn't do any of that, individual entities grew, and eventually they created the city that we now know today as Washington, D.C., lot by lot, or multiple lots at a time. And so moving forward, I think, well, how do we go back to that method of development? What's stopping it? Is it regulations? Is it too burdensome to just develop one lot at a time? And can we ever go back to that sort of method of development to create places as good as the places that we love today? And so while I still don't have access to research papers and documents because I'm not in college yet, there's a lot of things that I can do, like look around on Google Earth and scour for examples to hopefully research later. And so 2 examples I put are Taichung City in Taiwan, and even Homerus Quartier in Almere, the Netherlands, which we made fun of in the school. But I think even though the architecture probably leaves something to be desired, the underlying urbanism is very interesting in that it's a case study of self-built housing, much like how they did it in the past. So this goes to the central tenet that's probably the most practical aspect of traditional architecture, which is the fact that it's able to harmonize these messy urban environments so that we get both the best of both worlds, both coherent architectural environments, but then also something that's interesting, vibrant, and most importantly, can evolve over time. And so while I don't have an answer for how we can achieve that again, I would look forward to, in college, researching this further and hopefully being able to solve this problem and go back to building places as good as they were back then, lot by lot, and able to evolve over time. But ultimately, this is all still a testament to the fact that I learned these ideas first in the Netherlands, and I hope to keep on learning in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brandon.
Thank you, Brandon. It was great to see.
Session?
Don't we have more time for another?
I think we have about 2 minutes left until we come back to the main session.
Okay. Noah Tang, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I can go very, very quickly. I think Flavio might have misspoke. I am not a practitioner of architecture, even though I am a graduate alumni of the Utrecht program 2023. So I'm actually a history teacher in Bloomington, Illinois, and I have my master's degree in urban history from the Illinois State University. I'm going to quickly kind of go over some other ideas outside of architecture itself, because I feel like architecture, traditional architecture, is just a small portion of the whole thing, right? This right here is how we build cities in the United States. This is Tennessee, this is California, and this is my hometown. Okay, you can't really notice any of the differences of the built environment here. But I do believe that small American cities can be saved. And I think that's because political change is often easier in smaller towns, and specifically Midwestern Rust Belt towns have good pre-war development patterns. Now, unfortunately, most cities have focused on unsustainable growth in the 1970s, and especially after World War II. We're looking at car-centric development. One thing that I did do in my own research, I used publicly available data to really look at total tax value for all the lots in my city, as well as tax value per acre, which is something that urbanists really like discussing. That big, tall area in the front, in the center of this image, is the city's downtown. In this example right here, this is Lafayette, Louisiana. What we see, traditionally speaking, every traditionally oriented development that is not built for cars is, in fact, financially solvent. And this is really important for the future of American cities, because right now we are going down a road of insolvency. The average suburban household costs the city about $3,462, as well, compared to the urban household, it's about double. One of the projects that I really enjoy doing is what is called Ghosts of the Past. I am a historian by trade, so I looked at a lot of really old photos of my town, and I basically went to their exact locations today, and I superimposed the buildings on where they are. So this is the old.
Sorry, we have 1 minute left. I mixed it up a little. It was my fault for today.
Okay. This is the old City Hall on the left in Bloomington, and on the right, this is the new telecoms headquarters. So you notice this horrible monstrosity has replaced this beautiful old style building. Again, we're also talking about the scale of buildings in downtown, because we see a retrenchment of downtown offices. A lot of malls and other strip malls type developments were built out on the east side of my town, and we see the complete collapse of real estate in the central area of town. Lastly, we're taking a look at how our civic life really is destroyed when we get rid of things like our libraries. This is our old downtown library on the left, and on the right, this is what it looks like today. This is our downtown Main Street in 1984, and this is what it looked like in 2022. So one of the things I think is very important when we're talking about with the general public, how do we make traditional architecture buildable again in these places, right? Because according to the current regulations, we cannot build what we have destroyed. So one of the things that I'm focusing heavily on is working with city council, working with city government to change the zoning ordinances, to change the local codes, to make sure that we can actually build traditionally in a fabric that matters. So one last thing I want to really show you is we've gotten rid of our parking minimums near downtown, so that hopefully changed things.